Alright guys, TouchCrabbit back again today. Hope you're enjoying your Friday so far and looking forward to the weekend. Today I wanted to talk about Douglas Censor Martin. He's not particularly happy with this situation right now as a substitute in the CoD League that hasn't really got his shot so far this season. I wanted to talk through that situation and why I think that Doug is maybe looking at this from a pretty results orientated view of his own perspective compared to some other substitutes in the league that have made decent impacts on the squad, but to some degree he does have a point. So like if you guys enjoy the video, subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, just wanted to mention Dylan MaddG Daly, one of the most accomplished players in the amateur scene, has been released from his team, basically just dropped off the squad that won the most recent Challengers Cup in the European region. Very interesting, looking for a Challengers team to play this weekend with. Don't even know how my luck runs at a minus rate these days. And as we saw Whalers say a couple of days ago, but I didn't mention it, Defrag has decided to part ways with us on the Train Hard team that came second. This was the result most recently. Weeman, Nolson, Mac at Nasty and Linney, number one in the European region in that Challengers Cup. Train Hard came second, or actually I think this was at the Florida weekend, so ignore me. But you know, same kind of thing. Macat's off this team. It looks like Defrag is going to be in the squad, but nothing yet announced. Hopefully Macat can land on his feet somewhere because he's definitely a very entertaining player to have in the Call of Duty scene at the very least, in my opinion. Also wanted to mention this, yesterday a few people were noticing that Ferro was scrimming with the Team Pine bench squads. As you can see, one of the screenshots right here, Glowfrosty going 28-4 against them, so pretty dominating performance from some of these amateur guys against the Team Pine bench team. But yeah, Ferro didn't say later on Twitter, so fellow Team Pine members, scrim, be there or be square, but he did say later, just scrimming with Team Pine today to not be bored. Brothers team can't scrim this week, so you know, got Warzone things to handle. So still on the Florida team, nothing really has gone different there. Just wanted to mention that if you guys saw that and maybe you were entirely unsure exactly how it was going. Discussed yesterday how Parasite said need one for the cup this weekend, so this weekend is Challengers Cup 4 or something like that. We'll discuss it when it comes to the time. With Censor, Zinx and Gorgo Knight, let me know. Doug is eligible, says Ben J. Nissim, and as Parasite says, he said so, I don't know, and Censor says, I am eligible for challenges. Are you going to be streaming? 100%. So it was all looking good. Doug was back in the game, going to be playing in the Challengers Cup, going to be seeing him alongside Parasite. Hopefully he can get a decent result. Would be pretty cool to see. He seemed to have figured some sort of contractual stuff out, because we heard Panda was talking about the fact that he's back on the bench. Now it may be more difficult for him due to some like changes in league rules with the whole pandemic situation, meaning it's more difficult for Panda and Co to actually play in the Challenger stuff and find other teams. Not exactly sure what the rules say on that. We haven't heard anything publicly. But since supposedly he can still play eligible for Challengers, maybe the Panda situation that he was discussing was that now he's been in the starting lineup and is back on the bench, it might be more difficult for him to play in the Challenger side, as a lot of the substitutes have done so far this season. However, Parasite then tweeted this out yesterday. Streamers live, Scrimming Pentagram and Co with the Challengers Cup team for this weekend. Zinx, Gorgo Knight, Rambi Bambi and Dilo. What happened to Doug? I got sketched on, he says. I think it's slightly tongue-in-cheek here because Parasite then replies, not true, we couldn't find a competent fifth and this is Zinx and Gorgo's actual team, so it made sense for Parasite to play with them and basically leave Doug in the dust. I say you guys team up next week. I agree. Chris and I, that's Parasite, have to team up. So Doug says this. Obviously, it looked like it was all lining up for Doug. And then before you know it, he ends up not getting chosen to be on this team. And he now has nothing sorted for the weekend. So once again, Censor tries his best, but it just isn't quite enough. And that's something we've seen over the last couple of seasons, to be honest. And it's pretty unfortunate. So Doug Censor Martin says here, being a substitute in the league is being set up to fail. Hopefully the CoD League can change the rules so subs are allowed to play with other subs, especially since everything is online now. You see players like Vivid the Warrior, It's Spartan, Mac Melts become starters in the league by grinding challenges and performing, while substitutes like myself and Tommy are warming a bench unable to get any practice. As a player in the league that wants to see the league become successful and use my following to help, it feels like I'm in a situation where I can't be used in any capacity to contribute towards my team or myself. Really hope the league can change this now instead of later. So this is very interesting, right? I think from Censor's perspective, of course, earlier this season, we did speculate to some degree that he was actually playing some scrims with the New York squad that wasn't doing very well at the time. Accuracy came out, Censor came in. This was after the whole 0 out, happy in and happy out, like what are we going to do with the squad right now? And yeah, Censor came in for a little bit, but clearly they didn't really like that approach. Then they brought Mac in off the hybrid black team that did so well, came second place at the opening at Minnesota Open, and Mac came into the squad and he's had a lot of success, right? So clearly, Censor is in an interesting spot right now, as with a lot of the other substitutes that haven't been able to do much this season. Because if you're a substitute on the squad, you can play in a Challengers Cup team, but you have to play with people that aren't on other Challengers rosters. So for example, the Atlanta FaZe Academy, they have a few guys on that squad, but also you can look at the Seattle Surge team, which has Panda and Proto. Earlier this season, they were playing on a squad, Panda and Proto, and then 3 other guys that couldn't be substitutes on other squads. So it does make it more difficult if you are a substitute to play in the Challengers Cup and still necessarily get your name out there, right? And a lot of Challengers players haven't really been doing it for a number of reasons. But at the same time, I think it must be said, as we will talk about in a second here, that a lot of substitutes, that the fact that he says being a substitute in the league is being set up to fail, this isn't necessarily the case, but it can be depending on what team you're on. So just looking at some replies to this real quick, Tommy then says, first year in my career, I'll never play at a single event since Call of Duty 4, which is pretty crazy to be honest. And then Doug is Raw says, honestly bro, subs and other things are more involved than you. It blows my mind you haven't had a shot one map, even though you kind of did get some practice in scrims. You have a lot of pride and patience. I couldn't agree more. I could have been making content and a ton of more growth, but I feel like a dried up race and just slowly fading into the darkness. Does make me feel kind of bad for Doug in this case. And as Saint says here, while the rules do need to change in certain aspects, subs on different franchises should not be able to team together and just farm the Challenger system. And I do agree with this, right? Like the whole idea of a Challenger system is that they can actually, Challengers players that aren't on Pro League teams, that don't get this Pro League salary, should be able to catch up and win this money and prove themselves to the possibility that they do get picked up next season. I wouldn't want to see a team of 5 Pro League substitutes who are really, really good players just on the cusp of being in the league, beating up all the Challengers teams every single week in, week out, right? You don't want to see that. So I think Saint is on the money to some degree. And Brack replies to Censor with similar sentiments, right, given the season he had last year. Now he's stuck on the bench for Toronto Ultra, not even getting a shot, and doesn't really have an opportunity to prove himself, right, because the Toronto Black squad, they can't play in the Challengers. I wonder whether that wasn't part of Toronto Ultra's initial thinking at the start of the season. I wonder whether they thought that it was actually going to be possible for the Toronto B team to play in Challengers and get the experience and practice that way. However, they can't do that due to the league rules, so all they can do is the 5 players that are on the bench for the Ultra, they can just scrim and try and practice and prove to Marky B and the rest of the guys on the main team that they are an option if they did want to make a change on the Toronto Ultra starting lineup. So let's look at a couple of things here, because as Doug says in his initial tweet right here, guys like Vivid, Sparta, McMelt picked up these first 2 to the LAG. McMelt, of course, to the Subliners, picked up from the open bracket, I suppose as it would be in the past, Challengers system, rather than coming through as a substitute that was picked up at the start of the season. And this is what McMelt's career looked like, of course, on the hybrid black team earlier this season, along with some other ones for the 2K. Picked up to New York Subliners, and clearly they have improved a lot from there. A lot of that, I would argue, is off the back of Mac's performances most recently. But this is the main screenshot I wanted to look like and quite have a look at Censor's statement right here, because the teams in red are the teams that have made some sort of substitute change so far this season from players they had on the bench. I can't precisely remember whether LAG had Blast on the bench from the start of the year, but I think they did. So bringing him in was an example. Of course, Vivid and Spark came in from elsewhere, but Blast was an example of being on the bench of a team that isn't doing so well and being introduced to the starting lineup. And I think it just happens to be how the team has worked out, right? You look at the Subliner squad, Zero came out, Happy came in, Happy came out, like Censor came in kind of, and then Max in the starting lineup now. It's just somewhat unfortunate for Censor that he didn't work out with the squad, and he's not the player, you know, he's not exactly going to be a dominant force SMG like some of the other players were. Yes, he has proven himself as a pretty serviceable support player over the years, but Matt could definitely drop way more numbers than Censor can, so it makes sense why he's not in the starting lineup, right? But you look at some other teams, you've got Huntsman who have been bringing General into the starting lineup as of late, Gunless going to the bench. You look at Royal Ravens, rated out the team. They tried to bring Nasty in from elsewhere, that didn't work, but Shawnee got the chance in from the bench. OGLA, of course, we see Chino coming in for JCap. Seattle Surge, we saw Panda come in for Enable earlier in the season. Toronto Ultra, of course, we've seen changes. Metals coming in for Looney. Bance coming in for, you know, some other changes have been made throughout the season, right? I think Lucky was in the team earlier and Bance came in for that. So, you know, all things considered this season, I don't think that Doug is necessarily correct when he says right here in this tweet that being a substitute in the league is being set up to fail. If you don't get chosen and you don't get into the starting lineup because the team is so good or whatever, just for an example here, I wanted to look at the Dallas Empire team. Tommy sitting on the bench, but we've got this guy Tish, right? And you guys might not even remember this name. He was a pretty, well, at least well-known amateur player the last couple of seasons, but he joined the team back in December time when they had to kick Mutex after all that drama. And he's just been sitting on the bench, right? And I talked about the time about this. Like, look, if you're Tish, you can go onto this team and you can make 50 grand guaranteed minimum salary just for the year. But if you're on the bench, what are you going to do on that squad that is going to make a difference? It's highly, highly unlikely that Tish would ever come into the starting lineup. As with Tommy, really, unless something drastically went wrong with the Dallas Empire team, as it clearly hasn't. So you're making money sitting on the bench, but at the same time, when it comes into next season, are they going to re-pick up Tish as their substitute, or are they going to make the probably intelligent business decision and say, look, Tish, the substitute for this year, that's fine, like, thanks very much, just in case we needed you. But this season, we're going to go to someone who's proved themselves in the Challenger circuit last year, and maybe a more competitive option that's actually proved themselves that they could be good in a starting lineup, and Tish hasn't got that opportunity, right, this entire season. So, of course, there's two sides to the story. I think that Doug is correct to some degree, but I think he's looking at his own circumstances and he's thinking, look, I didn't get in the starting lineup, therefore, you know, the situation is very difficult. But some other substitutes have been able to make it work, right, from the bench, going into the starting lineup and making an impact from initially being chosen, not just chosen through the Challenger side. And it's just unfortunate that Doug hasn't got that opportunity, but at the same time, there's other players you could say on other teams that are superior to Doug. So you could argue it definitely makes sense that people like Panda and co have been picked up to the starting lineup and given a go. Chino, etc., has won championships relatively recently in the World War II era, going into that team. So yeah, I can see the argument either way. Treat to hear your thoughts in the comment section below on this one. Just wanted to mention on this, the teams in green are squads that have picked up players from outside, right? So most teams, is what I was trying to go for here, have picked up players that they have decided pre-season they want to give a go. The likes of General, Shawnee, for example, you know, Blast, Panda, Chino, and the Toronto Ultra just have an array of substitute players, but Mutineers and Subliners, the guys like Pharaoh and Mac, they've picked up from outside the league, coming into their squad to help improve the team. But on the whole, I think that the substitutes definitely have got their opportunity, and you never know, later in the season we may see some other changes come into play also. So yeah, intrigued to hear your thoughts in the comment section below on this one. Like if you guys enjoyed the video, subscribe if you are new as always. Thanks for watching, stay safe, I'll see you next time.